Highway 16. 720 kilometers of two-lane asphalt cutting through the mountains and forests of northern British Columbia. On paper, it connects the city of Prince George to the port town of Prince Rupert. In reality, it connects a string of small Indigenous communities, and a long list of names that no one in Ottawa wanted to count. Since the 1970s, women and girls have disappeared along this highway. Some were found dead. Most were never found at all. The families of the missing gave it a name. They called it the Highway of Tears. For decades, the RCMP denied there was a pattern. For decades, the country looked away. This is the story of one road, and the people it swallowed. Highway 16 is not a highway in the American interstate sense. There are no rest stops every 30 kilometers. No truck stops blazing with fluorescent light. For long stretches, particularly in the central portion between Vanderhoof and Smithers, it runs through boreal forest so dense that you cannot see more than a few meters from the asphalt. The nearest town may be 80 kilometers away. Cell coverage disappears entirely for hours at a stretch. Communities along the route, Vanderhoof, Fraser Lake, Burns Lake, Houston, Smithers, Terrace, are small. The largest, Prince George, has a population of under 90,000. The indigenous nations along the corridor, the Wet'suwet'en, the Gitxsan, the Dakel, have lived in this territory for thousands of years. Their communities sit on or near the highway. Their young women, for generations, have used it to travel between towns, because the distance is too far to walk and the bus service is inadequate or non-existent. Hitchhiking was, for many, not a choice made from recklessness. It was the only practical way to move through their own territory. That vulnerability became a hunting ground. The first documented cases along the corridor date to the early 1970s. Gloria Moody, 19 years old, disappeared in 1971. Cecilia and departed the same year. Monica Ignaz, 15 years old, from Terrace, 1974. She was the age when many girls are just beginning to navigate the world outside their homes. Pamela Darlington, 1973. Gail Ways, 1976. These names did not appear together on any government document for decades. They were filed separately, in different RCMP detachments, often classified as runaways rather than missing persons. The assumption, rarely spoken aloud, but embedded in the response, was that Indigenous women who disappeared along the highway had probably left on their own terms. Most did not turn up. The RCMP's filing system, at the time, did not connect cases across detachment boundaries. There was no mechanism to notice that young women were disappearing from the same road at an unusual rate. Families who tried to report missing daughters were sometimes told to wait. That she would probably come home. The families waited. Their daughters did not come home. The disappearances continued through the 1980s and accelerated in the 1990s. Delphine Nichol, 15 years old, from Smithers, vanished in June 1990 while hitchhiking to a friend's house. Her body was never found. Ramona Wilson, 16 years old, from Smithers, disappeared in June 1994. Found 7 months later near the Smithers airport. Roxanne Thiara, 15 years old, from Burns Lake, 1994. Alicia Germain, 15, from Prince George, 1994. Lana Derrick, 19 years old, a university student, 1995. She was hitchhiking home for a weekend visit. She was never seen again. The decade accumulated names the way a road accumulates mile markers, steadily, without ceremony, each one marking a fixed point of loss. Local Indigenous organizations and family members began connecting the cases themselves. They created their own databases. They drove the highway, talked to truckers, put up posters. They did the investigative work that the institutions charged with public safety had not done. They gave the corridor a name. The Highway of Tears. It was not a poetic choice. It was a plain description of what the road had become. When families raised concerns with the RCMP about the number of missing women from a single road corridor, the response was, for years, institutional inertia. Individual cases were investigated individually. Cross-jurisdictional information sharing was inconsistent. Women classified as runaways were given lower investigative priority than women classified as missing. Indigenous women, statistically, were more likely to be classified as runaways. The racial disparity in investigative response was not invisible, it was documented by advocates, by journalists, by the families themselves. It was simply not acted upon. In 2005, a Highway of Tears symposium was organized in Prince George by First Nations communities, families of the missing, and advocacy groups. The symposium produced a report containing 33 recommendations to government. It called for increased bus service along Highway 16. It called for improved communication between RCMP detachments. It called for a dedicated investigative unit. Most recommendations were not implemented. The bus service improvement did not materialize for years. The families continued driving the highway themselves, stapling photographs to telephone poles, stopping at gas stations to ask if anyone had seen their daughters. They were doing the work of the state. The state had failed them. In 2005, the RCMP established Project E-PANA, a dedicated investigative unit tasked with reviewing 18 unsolved cases along the Highway 16 corridor and other northern BC highways. The name came from the Inuit spiritual figure associated with the souls of the dead. The unit eventually expanded its mandate to include cases along Highway 97 and Highway 16's eastern extensions. Investigators reviewed thousands of documents, re-interviewed witnesses, and pursued new forensic leads. E-PANA publicly linked 9 of the 18 cases, meaning investigators believed the same perpetrator was responsible for multiple deaths and disappearances. They identified Bobby Jack Fowler, an American itinerant worker who had moved through British Columbia in the 1970s, as a likely perpetrator in at least one case and a strong suspect in others. Fowler had died in an Oregon prison in 2006 while serving time for the attempted murder of a young woman. He had never been charged with any Canadian offense. With him went whatever knowledge he carried about the highways missing. E-PANA was disbanded in 2015 without solving the majority of its cases. Its files were transferred to the RCMP's Unsolved Homicide Unit. Most families received no resolution. Bobby Jack Fowler is the only named suspect to emerge publicly from the Highway of Tears investigations. He was an American, born in Texas, who drifted through Canada in the 1970s working construction jobs and seasonal labor. He drove a distinctive blue Datsun pickup truck, a detail that witnesses along Highway 16 recalled in multiple unrelated interviews. In 1974, he attacked a young woman near Clearwater, British Columbia, leaving her for dead. She survived and identified him. He fled to the United States before he could be charged in Canada. He continued a violent career in the American Pacific Northwest. He died in an Oregon corrections facility in 2006, serving a sentence for a 1995 attempted murder. E-PANA investigators, working with Oregon authorities, collected DNA from Fowler post-mortem. That DNA was tested against biological evidence from Highway of Tears cases. RCMP stated publicly that Fowler was a suspect in the deaths of Colette Wilson and Monica Ignas. Whether he was responsible for additional cases along the corridor remains officially unknown. The families of the missing waited for DNA results that, when they came, confirmed suspicion but delivered no final closure. In 2016, the federal government of Canada launched the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, a 2-year commission with a mandate to investigate the systemic causes of violence against Indigenous women. The inquiry traveled across the country, heard from over 2,000 survivors, family members, and experts, and produced a final report in June 2019. The report's central finding was stark: Canada's colonial policies, the failures of law enforcement, and the institutional indifference to Indigenous life had combined to produce what the report called genocide. Not metaphor. Not negligence. Genocide. The federal government accepted the report. It committed to implementing the report's calls for justice. As of 2026, implementation has been partial. The specific calls for justice related to law enforcement accountability, including the creation of an independent oversight body for RCMP conduct in Indigenous communities, have not been fully implemented. The Highway of Tears remains largely unsolved. The majority of families along the corridor have received no answers about what happened to their missing relatives. The road still runs through the same forest. The cell coverage still disappears in the same stretches. The distance between towns has not changed. What is often missing from coverage of the Highway of Tears is the texture of what the families lived through. Matilda Wilson, mother of Ramona Wilson, spent years driving Highway 16 herself after her 16-year-old daughter disappeared in 1994. She organized searches. She put up posters. She attended symposiums. She spoke to journalists, to politicians, to anyone who would listen. She waited for the call that her daughter had been found alive. The call, when it came, was not the one she had been waiting for. Ramona's remains were found near the Smithers Airport 7 months after she disappeared. No one has been charged. Matilda Wilson continued, for over 30 years, to advocate for answers, for other families, for a road that takes and does not give back. She is one of many. The Highway of Tears is not an abstraction. It is a collection of specific lives, specific mothers, daughters, sisters, granddaughters, each of whom had a name before they became a statistic on a map. The families know all the names. They have not been allowed to forget any of them. Highway 16 today is superficially unchanged. The forest is the same. The distances are the same. Bus service was improved modestly in 2010, subsidized routes now cover parts of the corridor that previously had none. Cell coverage has improved along some sections. There are blue roadside signs now, installed by local Indigenous groups, marking stretches of the highway with words that acknowledge what happened there. They are small and easy to miss at speed. The province has created a victim services liaison position specifically for Highway 16 communities. Advocacy organizations continue to document cases and push for investigative resources. But the fundamental geography has not changed. The road is still long. The communities are still small. The institutional trust between Indigenous families and the RCMP has not been rebuilt. When a young woman goes missing along Highway 16 today, the response is faster than it was in the 1970s. Whether it is fast enough, whether enough has changed, is a question the families of the missing have been asking for 50 years. They are still waiting for an answer. The blue signs on the highway mark specific places where the road took someone. Drive slowly past them. Read what they say. The Highway of Tears is not a metaphor. It is a specific road, in a specific province, where specific people disappeared and were not looked for with the urgency they deserved. The families gave it a name because the institutions would not. They counted the missing because the government would not. If you want to understand Canada, not the postcard version, not the apology speeches, but the actual history of what was allowed to happen and why, subscribe now. Every week, a new story from the Canada that doesn't make it into the travel guides. The highway is still out there. So are the names.